So hey everyone, and in this video we are going to learn about a very popular hook, that is a use reducer hook. So let's first of all create a folder. Let's name it as useReducer ex, that's the example, and I'm just going to create a file useReducer ex.js. Okay, so I'll just say that it's shown into my app.js. So I'll just type here use reducer ex, and that's it. And now we are going to simply use it. So I'll just first of all open this npm start, and it would be again started. So you can see, yes, use reducer ex is here finally. So first of all, I'm just going to give you an example of React.js increment decrement. So we have already done this before, but still I'm just going to write it like this. So count, and actually it's set count, right? And I'm just going to use React useState, and initially the value is 0, and I'm just going to create a button to increment, and similarly it would show the value, and similarly the decrement value. So you can see we have already covered this before. One is the increment value, that means we increment the value, that means it would become 1. Initially it's 0, it would become 1, and similarly for minus it would become suppose if it was initially 0, it would become -1, and so on. We will increment or decrement on button press. So how it would look, so you can see this is the button, and if I increment, you can see it's incrementing and this is decrementing. Okay, so let me just make it more better, and I'll just say that style, and I'll just say display as flex. Okay, that would be better. So you can see, yeah, now it looks better. And you can also give some padding also. You can just say that we have some padding so that we have some space, right? So you can see that that's how increment decrement works here. That's fine. And you can see that button is having the functions, right? Buttons having the function. So this is the case for use state. But suppose you have a value where we have thousands of functions. So instead of writing it here, we are going to define it in the state itself. So for that we actually use useState. Okay, so it's similar to useState. That means it's similar to useState. We have useReducer, which is similar to useState, but useReducer simply has functions in itself. With useState, what you did was you defined the variable here and you're just declaring variables separately. But with useReducer, you can do it better. Okay, if you have multiple operations on a single state, you can see on a single state we have multiple increment, decrement. Suppose you have to divide, multiply, and so on. So we have multiple operations. For that, you can actually use useReducer. So for multiple functions, instead of defining it externally, you can define it here only using useReducer. Now, how we can exactly do that? Now let's try to use it. We would just say that I would just create a, I would just comment this out first of all, and we can also comment this out. Okay, you would just comment this out. And here guys, I'm just going to say that we have a value just like count. We have a value state. Okay, I'm just going to name it as, okay, something else. I'll just name it as okay, let's name it as state. Okay, because by default it's there. And then we have dispatch. Okay, state and dispatch. And here I'm just going to say like it's similar to count. It's state, set count, similar to dispatch. Okay, and here you just need to write useReducer. You can either write react.useReducer or you can directly write useReducer. Inside this guys, I would just pass a reducer function. So I'll just create that function later on, but I'm just going to call it here reducer func. I'm just going to name it like this. You can name it something else. Then we have some initial value. So I'll just say my initial value or initial state would be something. So we're just defining it somewhere, initial state, right? I've just defined it somewhere here. Okay, so I'll just say let initial state is suppose 0. Okay, I've defined it here, and I also have to define the reducer function. So I'll just say const reducer function. So reducer function actually has two parameters, state and action. So action is like, suppose what action you want to perform. Either you want to perform increment, decrement, multiply, subtract. That's known as action. That means multiple functions. So different parameters, like if I say increment, if action equals increment, then increment operation is performed. So I would just say that if action dot type, so we would be sending different types it's similar to the button press. Okay, so I would simply say if type equals increment, I would just will add the value to 1. That means whatever was the value, I would just increment the value. Okay, and I would just say if the else if action dot type is decrement, so I would simply pass this. Okay, I would simply decrement the value. So whatever is the value, what to do with this value would be defined with this action. Okay, so that's for decrement. Similarly, you can do whatever you want, and if there is something else, you can directly return the state. Okay, directly return the state. Suppose there is something else you don't know, so you are directly returning the value as it is. Okay, so that issue is not there. Okay, but suppose action is equal to action dot type equals to increment, then increment, else decrement. If there is anything else, just directly return that value, don't do anything. Okay, because there might be some cases you have provided wrong action, so obviously you don't know what to do with that action, so you would directly return the value as it is, you don't do anything, right? So that's the benefit. Now how to actually use this? So here we have defined some actions, that is increment or decrement operations, in a single state. You can see it's a single state, you don't need to define it in your UI, right? So that's the benefit. Now if you want to use this, what you have done is you have used this function here, and initial value is 0. You have simply said this would contain your value. Okay, whatever is the value, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, whatever is the value, initially this value would be what? Initially the value would be taken by initial state, that means it would be 0. What is the purpose of dispatch? So dispatch would actually allow us to use this. So what we can actually do is we will just use this again. I would just copy this, but now this time it would be a better approach. And often if you have multiple operations into a single state, so it would always be better to use reducer. Okay, so what we'll do here is, instead of this, now I'm just going to say dispatch, and here I'm just going to pass a type. Okay, so what would be the type? The type would actually define your actions type, right? So here I would just pass increment. For example, I would just pass increment. So this would actually allow us to perform increment operation, right? And similarly guys, I would just copy this again, and here I would just paste it, and this time it's actually decrement. Okay, so decrement, right? So decrement and increment. And now here we are having an issue because we want to show the value of state. Okay, so we want to show the value of state. Actually, instead of this I can show something else also. Okay, for example, my state 1. Okay, my state 1 and my dispatch 1. Okay, so that's the same. You don't need to worry about the names here. So if it's my state 1, you have to show my state 1, and here the method is my dispatch 1, my dispatch 1. Okay, so now what I'm saying is, if I click on this, my dispatch 1 is called with this type increment. Once I call this, it would be calling my reducer function, and the action would be set to increment, action type would be set to increment, and then I would just compare it. Okay, whatever it is, it would be doing the operation. So now if I just check that again, so here you can see that the problem here is state is not defined. Now it's perfect. If I increment, you can see it's done easily, and it's decremented easily. So you can see it's very easy. So suppose if in future I want to perform some operation like divide operation, so I'll just say else if, for example, I want to square something. Okay, I want to square something, or I want to reset, for example. So for reset, I would just say return initial state or return 0, whatever you want. You can return initial state or you can return 0, whatever it is. Suppose if I just create a button which allows me to reset. So we have a button which allows me to reset. So I'm just saying reset, type reset. So you can see if I click on reset, it became 0. Okay, so it's very beneficial. So you can see very easily I just created different conditions here. I have created different conditions, and according to that I can just call my type. Very easy. I don't need to define it here, it would be very lengthy. So it's very easy, and you can easily define things here, and you can use it by defining the type here, by just naming the type here. Okay guys, so I hope you understood the purpose of use reducer. Later on, if you have multiple purposes of a single hook, you can see we have a single hook here, right? We have a single variable, that is my state 1. It has multiple purposes. Either you can decrement, increment, reset, multiply, divide, whatever you want. You would just define it here, and then you would just create your functions, call your functions here directly, my dispatch 1, with the type of that here easily. Okay, so I hope you understood the purpose of this. I will see you in the next one. You can use this instead of useState. It's very good to use. And if you have multiple, like useState would be used when you have just single method, like you don't need to perform increment, decrement, you just want to change the value. Okay, like you are inputting something. Okay, in that case you would be directly using useState. That's good. But if you want to perform different operations like increment, decrement, multiply, subtract, then you would be using useReducer. It's very beneficial and it's very easy to use, right? This, okay, like this. Okay, so guys, I hope you understood this video. I will see you in the next one. Till then, say a good day. Bye bye.